Hi, I'm Rob Cosmna. Welcome to my shop. In this video, we are going to do a plane comparison between the traditional metal-bodied bench plane that you see me use all the time and this Krenov style wooden plane that I made back in the 1980s. We'll compare them. I'll give you my thoughts and see what you think. We're frequently asked questions about wooden planes, and I thought maybe we should actually address this in a video. In fact, we actually make and sell a drawer bottom plane that we use to cut the groove that would house the bottom of a drawer. I've got planes that I made years ago when I needed a specific profile. This one I made, as I mentioned, back in the late 1980s. I spent some time with Monroe Robinson, who was a fantastic hand tool woodworker. But we've never actually done a contrast and compare. That's what we're going to do today. But before I start, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on who James Krenov was, in case that name is new to you. James Krenov was born in 1920, died in 2009. His family immigrated to the United States from Russia when he was young. Now, he was a natural woodworker and trained in Sweden in the Scandinavian style of furniture making. He was a big fan of curves and taught and wrote numerous books on woodworking. In 1981, Krenov started the Fine Furniture program at the College of the Redwoods in Fort Bragg, California. He retired from the College of Redwoods in 2002, but he continued to work wood almost to the end of his life at a shop in his home. His work is displayed in museums in Sweden, Norway, Japan, and throughout the United States. He was an elected fellow of the American Craft Council in 2000. He was the first non-British recipient of the annual award of the Society of Designer Craftsmen's Centennial Medal in 1992. Krenov was presented with the Furniture Society's Award of Distinction in 2001. During his time teaching, he designed and developed a simple wooden body plane that we now call a Krenov style plane. He advocated building planes by laminating sections together, the sides, the two central body parts, and having a cross pin that holds a wooden wedge against a thick blade. This plane is a low center of gravity that gives these planes terrific feedback. Krenov shaped his planes for comfort and feedback. These little planes are fun and relatively easy to make and be turned out quite quickly, actually. In nearly every class he taught around the world over his 5-decade career of teaching, Krenov taught his students to make these simple laminated wood planes, and I've made several myself. So let me share with you my tie-in to Krenov and Krenov style planes. In 1987, I was hired to be the assistant at Anderson Ranch Arts Center. I actually worked as Peter Korn's direct assistant, and then I was there to assist the various instructors. And James Krenov was supposed to be teaching that summer, but he ended up getting sick, and he sent in his place a man named Monroe Robinson. And I got along with Monroe wonderfully, a great guy, fantastic craftsman. I mean, if somebody taught me about precision in woodworking, I'd have to say Monroe would have one of the strongest influences. He also understood what it was like to be a craftsman and how hard it was to make a living. I remember he was telling me he had just recently completed a dining room set out of Macassar ebony, and he said he figured he made about $5 an hour. So I know the feeling. Anyway, I ended up really liking the whole process. I made various wooden planes, and for a long time I actually used them. But now that I do it on a professional basis, this has become my favorite. So let me introduce the two of them. This is a Wood River 5.5. So it's copied or patterned after the Stanley Bedrock. However, Stanley never made a 2 3/8 inch wide bedrock. Theirs was 2 1/4. So this is, I guess you could say, a little bit original in that sense. I'll just give you the quick dimensions on this. It's 15 inches long. The blade, as I mentioned, is 2 3/8 wide. The body itself of the plane is about 2 13/16. Can't remember what it weighs, but it's a hefty plane. And that has the standard blade in it, standard chip breaker. Now, what we've made a few changes. We added what our adjust star, which makes it much easier to advance the blade. And we also put in our hex screw conversion kit, which allows you to use a 3/16 hex drive instead of a screw that always comes apart. Now, this was a plane that I made. I know it was done in the 70s because that was the late 80s, I'm sorry. It's just over 12 inches long. It has an 1 3/4 inch wide blade, so for reference sake, that's what you would find in a number 3 steel bench plane or metal bench plane. The body is made out of maple. There is a piece of Macassar ebony glued on the bottom. It's only about 1/8 of an inch thick, and that's there because it wears much better. It actually has a Wood River blade in it, so there's the blade and chip breaker are the same in both in terms of who made them. And then there's a pin there that I think is Macassar ebony as well, and that's what your wedge goes up against. Wedge is made out of a piece of maple as well. Well, let's focus on the wooden one first. The very first one I made was essentially just a big rectangle. I may have knocked the corners off to make it a little more comfortable in the hand, but then as I started doing more of them, I put a little bit of shape onto it, made it so it was a little easier to hold on the back and on the front. Interestingly enough, when I picked this one up to using it, I probably haven't used it in 30 years. I started playing and said, oh, wait a minute, there's something wrong. I went over to my granite reference plate with a sheet of sandpaper on it, and sure enough, this was way out of flat, so I had to come back and correct all of that. Didn't take that long. I also mentioned this is nothing more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of wood. Count this one 6, that one 7. The body's made out of maple, as I mentioned. And it's really quite simple to build. There wasn't a lot to it. Now, having said that, you don't have the ability to open and close the throat. So if you're dealing with highly figured wood where you want to be able to close that throat down and control tear out, you can make one specifically for that. But once you've made it, that's the only function of it. You're not going to be able to take a heavier shaving than what there's room in there. I made these. I used these for quite a while. That little smoother, I don't know whatever happened to you can see how long it's been. There's the oxidation on that piece of, I think it was Cocobolo. This one too had a hardwood sole added, and this one as well. Anyway, let's actually use this. Now, you're limited in your adjustments. There's very little room in there for the blade, so you pretty much have to keep that blade square each time you sharpen it. There wouldn't be any more than a 32nd of an inch lateral movement in order for it to shift like that. The bottom has a piece of Macassar ebony glued on. It wears better than maple wood. I think I've already got this set up to take a shaving. So that's pulling off, shaving off this piece of yellow cedar that's probably measuring, maybe 1.5 thou. So if I wanted to take a thinner pass, what I have to do, and this is where it's a little bit of a pain, come back in here and give the back a whack, and that'll retract the blade, tighten up my wedge. Now it pulled it back quite a bit, so now I've got to go through a process of tapping it until I get it back to where it's engaging the wood. Almost the luck of the draw, but of course people that use these all the time probably have it down. But if you're only picking it up for the first time or you haven't used it a lot, it may be more than what you want to wrestle with. I went a little bit too heavy. So finding that sweet spot of a really light pass is a little bit of a nuisance because I'd have to come back and give this another whack, make sure the wedge didn't come loose, and then go through that process again of advancing that blade. I'm not hitting it, but that's even thicker than the last one. And then if it was a little heavier on one side than the other, you're going to come in and give it a tap to the right or to the left. That one pulled off more of a shaving on the left side than the right. Straighten it out. Went too far. Now, one of the things that I don't like is that it's so light. It seems like with a light plane, it's all you. There's no momentum. You stop pushing, it stops moving. It does slide over the wood nicely. But my big reason for using wooden planes is when you have to come in and do something like this. I do a lot of chests, antique chests, and the inside radius has to be perfect. Well, I could take a wooden plane and I can go over and I can shape that sole to fit that profile and do the same thing with the blade. Can't do that with a metal body plane. Or, as I mentioned in this case, I love making these and using these to cut the groove for a drawer bottom. Why? Well, it's just so peaceful, fun, easy to do. No adjustment to be made. So wooden planes, well, I would say finicky is a good word. They're made out of wood, so the wood is going to move over time. You've got to be able to adjust that. And as far as the function of closing the throat, advancing the blade, retracting the blade, skewing it, getting it parallel to the sole by moving it left or right, there's a lot of finessing. Now, let me show you in comparison. I'm not trying to sell you on a steel-bodied plane or metal-bodied plane, but I'm going to tell you why I like this one so much. So this is the only modifications. This is a Wood River 5.5. We added what we call the adjustar, something we came up with a few years ago that just makes the advancing and retracting so much easier because it gives you the leverage of pushing down on these spokes instead of trying to turn that knob. And we also changed out all of the adjustment screws are a 3/16 hex, just because it's so much easier. It doesn't slip out like a normal slot would. So I pick up my plane like this, which by the way is going to be in the same condition in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years time, so I don't have to worry about movement. I'll advance the blade until it shows up as a thin black line. Use the lateral adjustment underneath the blade to get it parallel to the sole. And once I do, I then retract it, meaning I pull the blade all the way in so that it's not making any contact. And then I start planing. And while I'm in that motion of planing, I just move that blade slightly until it starts to pick up a shaving. I want to make sure that I'm getting a shaving that is uniform in thickness, side to side. I cut a groove in there, so that's why I'm getting 2 pieces. And if there's any adjustment that needs to be made, if it's heavier on the right side, I'm going to push the lateral adjustment lever toward the right, or opposite if it's on the left. And then you can pull that in for a lighter and lighter pass until you're getting just a whisper of wood. Or if you got to remove a lot of wood, if I want to get rid of that groove, I can take a really heavy cut. And then I can go right back to a really fine setting, all within seconds and literally with my fingertips. So I'm not a fan of wooden bodied planes as my go-to plane, but for that reason that I mentioned, specialty planes, yes. If I want to open or close the throat, I come in here, there's 3 screws on the back side, loosen the 2 outside, take the middle one and advance and move the whole frog assembly forward till that throat closes down. Gives me lots of control where wood is starting to lift up or tear, and then I can reverse the process in seconds. I can also use this on my shooting board, which I do on a regular basis. So, in conclusion, if you want a user plane that's going to require the least amount of fuss, both in getting it set up and using it, there you go. If you enjoy making planes and you want to use them that way, or you want to use them for that reason that you've actually made it, well, by all means, the wooden bodied plane. But personally, I'm going to take the steel bodied plane with the exception noted every time. Hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.